Okay, real quick. Raise your hand if you think that once you hit $1 million, you're done. You retire, you sit margaritas on a beach somewhere, and your biggest stress is whether to get the extra guac. Yeah? That's what I thought too. So let me introduce you to David. David is 58 years old, a software engineer from Austin, Texas. He's got a beautiful house, paid off, 2 kids in college, okay, that part hurts, a spouse who works part-time, and a portfolio worth $3.2 million. He did everything right. Over 30 years grinding, maxed the 401k, invested consistently. By every traditional measure, this guy is done. He's won the game. Except David can't retire. He checks his brokerage app every morning before he even gets out of bed. He runs retirement calculators at least twice a week. He's turned down 2 vacations in the last year because, quote, the market looks uncertain. His wife thinks he's lost his mind. And his therapist, yes, David has a therapist now, says he's showing classic signs of financial anxiety. $3.2 million, and he feels unsafe. This is not just a made-up story. According to a 2023 survey by Northwestern Mutual, nearly 48% of Americans with a net worth over $1 million say they don't feel financially secure enough to retire. These are millionaires, plural M, and they're waking up at 2 a.m., like David, panicking about running out of money. So what's going on here? Is it greed? Is it math? Is it some kind of psychological trap that even the wealthy can't escape? Let's get into it. Reason 1. The number keeps moving. Here's the first reason millionaires are afraid to retire, and it is sneaky because it masquerades as being responsible. The number keeps moving. When David was 30, he thought $1 million would be enough to retire. When he hit $1 million, he decided he needed $2 million, just to be safe. When he hit $2 million, inflation had kicked up and now he needed $3 million. When he crossed $3 million, his financial advisor mentioned that with his lifestyle and potential healthcare costs, he might want to push for $4 million. And here's the cruel joke. The closer David gets to his goal, the further away it feels, because now he actually has something to lose. This is what behavioral economists call the moving goalpost problem, and it's brutally common among high achievers. The goal was never really about the number. The goal was about the feeling of security, and feelings, unlike spreadsheets, don't have a finish line. There's a study from Purdue University that found once people earn around $95,000 a year, the emotional boost from more money slows down significantly. In other words, money helps a lot up to a point. It reduces stress, it increases comfort, but after a certain level, more income doesn't automatically mean more happiness. But for financial anxiety, that one has no ceiling. You can keep feeding it $1 million at a time, and it'll still ask for more. So the fix isn't more money. The fix is defining what enough actually means, and then committing to that number like it's a contract with yourself, which is incredibly hard to do and honestly a topic for another video. Reason 2. Sequence of returns risk, the monster under the bed. Now let's get into something that sounds technical but is genuinely one of the scariest things in personal finance. It's called sequence of returns risk, and once you understand it, you will never look at retirement the same way again. Here's the deal. You've probably heard that the stock market averages about 7 to 10% annually over the long run. Great. So if you retire with $2 million and you need $80,000 a year to live on, that's a 4% withdrawal rate. The math works, right? Easy. Except, and this is a big except, it depends enormously on when the bad years happen. If the market drops 35% in your first 2 years of retirement and you're pulling out $80,000 every year on top of that loss, you can permanently damage your portfolio to the point where it never recovers, even if the market comes roaring back in years 3, 4, and 5. You've already sold shares at low prices. You've locked in the losses. Let's put some numbers on this. Say you retire in 2000 with $1 million. The dot-com crash happens, then 9/11, then you're barely recovering and 2008 hits. If you were withdrawing $50,000 a year during all that, your portfolio might be below $500,000 by 2010, even if the market eventually recovered for everyone else. You didn't recover because you were bleeding out the whole time. This is not hypothetical. This happened to real people. And millionaires who understand sequence of returns risk are absolutely right to be cautious, because the timing of retirement, not just the size of the portfolio, can make or break the whole thing. So what's the solution? Most financial planners recommend having 1 to 2 years of cash set aside outside the market. a flexible withdrawal strategy, and ideally some income that doesn't depend on selling stocks, like rental income, Social Security, or even part-time work, which leads us nicely into our next point. Reason number 3, healthcare, the retirement budget destroyer. If sequence of returns risk is the monster under the bed, then healthcare costs are the monster in the bed, wearing your pajamas, eating your snacks. Here's the stat that will make your jaw drop. According to Fidelity's annual retiree healthcare cost estimate, the average 65-year-old couple retiring in 2023 would need approximately $315,000 in today's dollars just to cover healthcare costs throughout retirement. That's after Medicare kicks in. That's not including long-term care. Long-term care, meaning nursing homes, assisted living, in-home care, is a whole other beast. The average annual cost of a private room in a nursing home in the United States is now over $100,000 per year. The average stay is around 2.5 years. That's $250,000 easy. And about 70% of people over 65 will need some form of long-term care at some point. Now you see why David is sweating. He's not just planning for a retirement, he's planning for a potential medical catastrophe that could wipe out years of savings in a matter of months. And here's the thing that really puts millionaires in a bind. They often own too much to qualify for Medicaid, but not enough to just write unlimited checks to healthcare providers without eventually running dry. They're stuck in the expensive middle, where every dollar they spend on healthcare is one fewer dollar in their legacy, their travel fund, or their emergency cushion. Healthcare costs are also inflating faster than general inflation, around 5 to 6% per year historically. So that $315,000 estimate, in 15 years it could be significantly higher, and no retirement calculator can fully account for that uncertainty, which is exactly why smart people lie awake at night running worst-case scenarios in their heads. Reason number 4, identity crisis. Who am I without my job? Okay, let's talk about something that doesn't show up on any balance sheet, but is absolutely devastating to retirees: the identity crisis. For many high earners and successful professionals, work isn't just what they do, it's who they are. David isn't just a software engineer, he is the software engineer, the guy who leads teams, solves problems, gives presentations, wins awards. His entire social circle is built around colleagues. His daily sense of purpose comes from his calendar, his inbox, his deliverables. And then one day, poof, it's gone, and he's home, in his pajamas, at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. Researchers at MIT and Harvard have studied this extensively. They found that retirement, especially early or abrupt retirement, is strongly associated with increased rates of depression, cognitive decline, and even shorter lifespans in people who didn't have strong non-work identities. That is wild. Retiring can literally affect how long you live. Now add money to this equation. Work for wealthy people is often not about the paycheck anymore. It's about staying relevant, staying sharp, feeling valuable. And the fear is, if I stop working, I stop being me. And what if I don't like who I become? This is why so many millionaires say they'll retire eventually, but never actually do it. It's not always about the money. Sometimes it's about not knowing what they do with themselves on a random Wednesday afternoon when the rest of the world is busy being productive. The people who navigate this best are the ones who build a second life before they leave the first one. Hobbies, community involvement, creative projects, mentorship, travel plans, whatever it is, you need an identity waiting for you when the work identity fades out. Reason 5, the 4% rule is under attack. For decades, the 4% rule was the golden standard of retirement planning. The idea is simple. If you withdraw 4% of your portfolio each year in retirement, and your portfolio is invested in a mix of stocks and bonds, you should have enough money to last 30 years without running out. So if you have $2 million, you can safely spend $80,000 a year. Sounds clean, right? Well, some of the brightest minds in the country are now saying that number might be outdated and possibly too high for today's world. Here's why. The 4% rule was derived from historical data in 1994, based on U.S. stock and bond market returns going back to the 1920s. But those returns assumed a world with higher bond yields, different inflation dynamics, and shorter retirement periods. Today, we're looking at potentially 35 or even 40-year retirements for people who retire at 55 or 60, and bond yields, while improved recently, spent years near historic lows. Some researchers now suggest a safer withdrawal rate might be closer to 3% or even 3.3%. That sounds like a small difference, but it's not. At 3%, you need $2.67 million to safely withdraw $80,000 per year, instead of $2 million. That's an extra $670,000 you need to accumulate, years of additional work and saving. So when David hears his financial planner say, hey, the 4% rule might not be reliable enough, that is not reassuring news. That is gasoline on the anxiety fire. Reason 6, inflation, the silent savings eater. We all got a very unpleasant refresher course in inflation between 2021 and 2023. But for retirees, inflation isn't just annoying, it's existential. Here's the math. If you retire at 65 with $60,000 a year in expenses and inflation averages just 3% annually, by the time you're 85, you'll need over $108,000 per year to maintain the same lifestyle. Your expenses will nearly double in 20 years, and your portfolio better be growing fast enough to keep up while you're also withdrawing from it. Millionaires know this, and it's one more reason they look at their portfolio and think, is this actually enough? Because it's not just about today's expenses, it's about every future version of today's expenses escalated by a number you can't fully control. The irony is that wealthier retirees sometimes experience what's called lifestyle inflation on top of regular inflation, meaning their personal spending tends to rise faster than the consumer price index because they're spending in categories like travel, healthcare, and high-end services that inflate faster than bread and milk. So their 3% inflation assumption might actually be 5% in practice, which means their math is off before they even start. So what's the actual solution? We've spent a lot of time making retirement sound terrifying. Let me pull it back and give you some actually useful takeaways whether you're 30 years from retirement or 3. Number 1, define your number and make it real. Don't just chase a vague goal like financial freedom. Sit down, build a realistic budget for your retired life, account for healthcare, inflation, and fund money, and work backward from there. What specific number gives you a 95% chance of success? That's your target. Write it on a sticky note. Commit to it. Number 2, build income streams that don't require selling assets. Rental income, dividend portfolios, Social Security optimization, annuities. Any of these that reduce your dependence on selling stocks in a down market can dramatically reduce sequence of returns risk. The more your living expenses are covered by income, the less vulnerable you are to bad timing. Number 3, don't retire from something, retire to something. The happiest retirees I've ever read about and talked to aren't the ones who escaped work. They're the ones who replaced work with something just as meaningful. Build your post-retirement identity before you need it. Number 4, use a flexible withdrawal strategy. Instead of blindly withdrawing 4% every year regardless of market conditions, consider a guardrails approach. Spend a bit more in good years, pull back in bad ones. This dramatically extends portfolio longevity without sacrificing too much quality of life. Number 5, plan for healthcare. Seriously. Look into long-term care insurance, health savings accounts, and how Medicare works. Don't leave it as a vague line item in your budget. Model it out with real numbers, including worst-case scenarios. Here's the bottom line. David isn't afraid to retire because he's greedy or irrational. He's afraid because he's smart enough to see how many things can go wrong, and because nobody ever taught him that the goal isn't to eliminate risk, it's to get comfortable with the risk that remains. The millionaires who do retire happily aren't the ones with the biggest portfolios. They're the ones who did the work, financial and psychological, to make peace with uncertainty. They have a plan for the bad scenarios. They have an identity outside of work, and they made a conscious decision to say, enough is enough. I've earned this. You can too, whether your number is 500,000 or 5 million. If this video made you think about your own retirement fears in a new way, do me a solid and hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more content like this, and drop a comment below. What's your biggest fear about retirement? I read every single one. I'm Matt, and I'll see you in the next one.